This is our Earth, our planet Earth, which we take so much for granted in so many ways. Why is this so? The first and most obvious reason is that we walk all over our Earth, never bothering to look down. We just don't bother to take a closer look at our Earth to see what she's really like, what she's doing, and how she's behaving. We don't try to understand her. We fail to understand that everything we do, all our actions, all our activities, all our infrastructure is supported by our Earth. We fail to appreciate that everything we do, everything we build, every engineering structure that we erect is resting on our Earth. The Earth beneath our feet. But how much do we really know about our Earth? What are these secrets that the Earth is hiding? What are these secrets being hidden from us? I certainly don't know all her secrets, but if you are willing to listen, I'll tell you some of them. You will be amazed. The truth is that the Earth does not really hide these secrets from us, for they can be seen everywhere. The real problem is with us. We don't look to see for ourselves. Sometimes this lack of knowledge of the Earth's behavior costs us dearly in infrastructure and lives. This should not be so. We do not have to wait till lives are lost. We can listen, look, and learn from our Earth. When a bridge fails, the Earth is trying to tell us something, but we are not listening. We are not looking. She's trying to tell us in the most subtle way that we are ignoring her. We do this time and again, every day of our lives and throughout history. Our Earth is literally bursting at the seams every single day to show us her secrets, but we miss the big picture because we don't look down. For the years that man has been living on Earth, we still have not learned much about the Earth. It is to our detriment. We are doomed to stumble on ignoring Earth and her secrets. Bridge failures on the Mississippi are not new. There have been others, and no doubt there will be more, unless we start to look and listen to what the Mississippi is telling us. When the Mississippi quakes, she's telling us that she's expanding. Her expansion is subtle, slow, but insidious. She quaked violently in 1811 into the winter of 1812, swallowing the town of New Madrid. The town slid off her banks and disappeared forever. It showed us that the river was capable of macro expansion possibilities. And in the same lesson, we should have understood that the river was also capable of micro expansion. What therefore has the most recent bridge failure on the Mississippi shown us? It has shown us that we are not looking at the micro river expansion. We are not looking at seismic creep. What is seismic creep? There's a lot of information on seismic creep on the internet, but we don't factor it into bridge design because we don't know that all river valleys are expanding. A lot of information can be got by typing in the receding seas on Google. Engineers worldwide build dams and bridges across river valleys, not knowing that the river valleys are expanding. This expansion is a micro contributory part of global expansion. Yes, this expansion is global. Our planet Earth is expanding. Many bridges spanning the Mississippi and other river valleys have failed in the past. Several of these bridge failures are termed mysterious. Why does a bridge fail mysteriously anywhere? Should that not make us curious? The very fact that they are termed mysterious failures should double our determination to solve the mystery. Instead, we continue to build bridges without giving any thought to the mysterious stresses imposed by Earth expansion. This is simply because we know nothing about our Earth and her functions. Remember, we build bridges and dams across river valleys, not knowing that they are all expanding. So we have not solved the problem, and the amazing thing is that is only the tip of the iceberg. The mystery deepens and becomes even more complex when we start to explore the greater portion of the iceberg below the surface. For example, what does the expansion of river valleys have to do with receding seas? What does receding seas have to do with the development of ancient civilizations? The expansion of river valleys and the receding seas are both manifestations of the same phenomenon, Earth expansion. What is the connection between Earth expansion and the loss of salt marshes in Jamaica Bay, New York? The answer is receding seas. What is the connection between Earth expansion and the loss of all our coastal wetlands in the last 400 years? The answer is receding seas. So when a bridge fails mysteriously, it means that engineers are not aware of the mysterious element seismic creep. Seismic creep is the invisible but insidious element omitted from bridge design. Bridge design for the future will have to factor in expansion of the planet Earth. Engineers will have to design for seismic creep. Seismic creep is the silent and insidious element of Earth expansion that makes seas recede and provided the land for the development of all ancient civilizations. It still keeps on providing new land for us today. It gives us our life and it gives us our land for territorial expansion. Remember, the Earth is not arrogant. We are. Sea level datum is a myth. We don't know sea level. The reason is that sea level is constantly falling as seas recede. Receding seas, believe it or not, is why we have to keep dredging our harbors. All harbor authorities have to dredge and keep dredging in order to keep shipping channels open ahead of receding seas. A recent example, for instance, the aircraft carrier Intrepid. It was docked for 24 years on the Hudson at Pier 86. Recent attempts to move the ship proved futile until the dredges were called in to clear a passage. Dredging has been in existence for thousands of years. Dredging operations in ancient times, however, were not as sophisticated as they are today, so as a result, many ancient harbors were lost to the receding seas. To understand the phenomena, we have to go back in time to explore successive eras in history. This is the only way to see where sea levels were back then for the purposes of comparison with where they are today. Only historical data can reveal the recession of the seas. From that data, we can interpret and better understand how much seas have receded throughout history. The ancient city of Ephesus was established in about the 10th century BC. It was established on lowlands on the Aegean Sea. The surrounding lowlands comprised malarial salt marshes. The early city had a spacious harbor, was often flooded by the tides. In the 1st century AD, St. Paul visited Ephesus and spent perhaps 3 years there spreading the gospel. As time went on, it was necessary to dredge the harbor to maintain shipping access. This proved a formidable task. For well over 100 years, ending in the early Christian era, efforts were made to dredge the harbor to offset the effects of the receding sea. Attalus made the first attempt to keep the harbor open. Nero, the proconsul, tried next, and finally, the Emperor Hadrian. All these successive attempts proved futile, and finally, the harbor project was abandoned. Ephesus lost its harbor forever. Today, Ephesus is 6 miles inland, left behind by the receding sea. Today, as we stand and look across the miles of land that was once part of the Aegean, you get a grasp of how much the sea has retreated in 2,000 years. The salt marshes are also gone with the receding sea. Today, dredging operations are a major expense in keeping harbors open. The New York Port Authority will be spending billions in the years to come to keep the harbor channels open. As the sea recedes, the cost of dredging escalates. The reasons are twofold. Container vessels keep getting larger and larger, demanding more depth. On the other hand, the sea's recession demands that channels have to be dredged deeper and deeper. Now the New York Port Authority is having to blast bedrock to get the greater depth demanded by the larger ships. The challenge for the future is to keep the harbor open at all costs. The Suez Canal was opened in 1869 with an average depth of 22 feet. Over the last 100 years, they have dredged to 30 feet and then to 40. Now they are dredging to 70 feet to accommodate megaships. All this dredging is done at great cost to keep the canal open. The dredging keeps on because it is necessary for the operation. The Canal Authority, like the New York Port Authority, however, knows nothing about the global phenomenon of receding seas. While the dredging goes on in the Suez Canal, the sea levels in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean have been falling. How do I know this? Again, history. We have to look back at history. Flight of the Israelites across the Red Sea tells us a lot about the sea's recession since that time in biblical history. Rome was founded on 7 hills, legend tells us. The hills were surrounded by malarial swamps. At the time of the Punic War, the Roman port at the estuary of the Tiber was Ostia. Ostia is 14 miles from Rome. All the grain and other commodities arriving by ship from the far-flung Roman Empire all around the Mediterranean came into Ostia. The cargo was then transshipped on barges up the Tiber to Rome, where it was offloaded on riverside docks into large warehouses. 3 Roman emperors, namely Claudius, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius, tried to keep the harbor open, but as time passed, the efforts were abandoned. Today, Ostia is 3 miles from the sea and 4 meters above sea level. The salt marshes that cover the entire area from Rome to Ostia are all gone with the receding seas. Those 3 Roman emperors knew nothing about receding seas. Today, the situation has not changed. Today, port authorities worldwide still dredge, totally unaware of the receding sea phenomenon. There is nothing that can be done about the sea's recession. It is ongoing. But what is surprising is that today, we still don't know about falling sea levels. All we hear about today is rising sea levels. How could this be? The most misleading and deceptive factor is the debate in sea level datum. Sea level has always been handed down to us as a fixed datum. This is a fallacy. Sea level datum is a myth. It does not exist. If sea level datum does not exist, how can we accept with any certainty that sea levels are rising unless we can prove it? By the same token, I cannot say with any certainty that sea levels are receding unless I can prove it. Well, In this series, I intend to prove. In my last video, I said that I was going to prove that sea levels are receding and that sea levels are falling. Rising sea levels is science fiction. Sea levels are not rising. Sea levels have been receding for a very long time and show no indication of any opposite rise. Practical examples, however, are always more graphic in proving a point. Newspaper articles and current accounts of everyday events are always more persuasive than hearsay. So to prove my point conclusively, I'm going to cite a couple of practical examples of the sea's recession right here in our very own backyard. An article in the New York Times published recently tells us that the state of New Jersey has been selling the land left behind by the receding seas. It seems that New Jersey has discovered this land bonanza and is making full use of it. The land left behind by the sea is prime real estate, as you would imagine. So the state of New Jersey is selling the newly created land for millions of dollars per acre. The land is being sold to casino owners who buy this land because it is choice real estate right on the seafront. The interesting part is that the state now realizes that it could have been selling these lands and collecting taxes since 1776, when the United States gained its independence from Britain. The problem is that the state had no way of knowing beforehand that the land was being created. Because the newly found land is used up as fast as it appears, people build on these lands even while they are still mud flats. In time, all evidence of their creation is erased. It is only since 1922 and subsequently, when aerial photography was used, that a graphic record of photographic time exposures revealed the growth of new land and the departure of the sea. In other words, New Jersey discovered that the sea is receding only since the inception of aerial photography in 1922. There are, however, 20 other states with shorelines who have found that they are benefiting from the bonanza, the newfound land left behind by the receding seas. So New Jersey is now reaping the benefits of the land by selling the acreage off to casinos and hotel chains at over $10 million per acre. And that was 20 years ago. But that is not all. Now that the state realizes that the sea does recede and leaves all this land behind, they have been poring over old maps to find out where the sea was back in 1776, with the hope that they can tax the landowners retroactively. The state constitution grants them riparian rights on all the land washed by the tides. The question of retroactivity, however, is being fought by the people who have occupied the lands for a long time in peace. The other problem is that the state, although it has constitutional rights to the land, does not know how much land has been left behind by the sea since 1776. So it seems that for now, they can only claim what they can prove that they own. That is where aerial photography came to the rescue. That was the only means of available proof. Photographs presented a graphic record of the growth of the new land being left behind by the sea since 1922. If aerial photography existed back in 1776, it would have revealed that the state of New Jersey has gained 20,000 acres in the 200 years since then. This all land left behind by the receding seas. In New York State, the situation is the same. Starting in 1941, 1,000 acres in Jamaica Bay were reclaimed from the salt marshes by dredging and dumping up the land. The purpose was to build a new airport. The airport, first called Idlewild Airport, started operations in 1948. In 1963, the airport was renamed the John F. Kennedy Airport in memory of the president. Because of all the activity in the area over the last 50 years, aerial photography has revealed that the remaining salt marshes in the Bay Area are disappearing. The photo study over successive years have indicated that the marshes are drying up and dying from the shoreline outward. The Environmental Protection Agency has been able to make a detailed study of the marshes over 50 years. This study was in all probability made easier with the assistance of aerial photographic records. The airport area is under constant scrutiny and surveillance from the air. So for this reason, detailed records exist of the salt marshes and their disappearance. This is all to the good. Disappearing salt marshes are an area of great concern to the environment. So a study was made and the results are published on the internet. The sum total of the study is that they don't know why the salt marshes are disappearing, but they are putting forward solutions for solving the problem. The fact is that the sea is receding, and as it recedes, it drains the salt marshes away. The salt marshes will all disappear in time as the sea recedes. All the salt marshes along the east coast of the United States have been disappearing since colonial times. In time, they will all disappear as the sea recedes. The receding seas affects all aspects of our lives, and in this series, I will endeavor to show you the many ways in which our lives are influenced by the receding sea. In my last video, The Mysterious Receding Seas, Part 6, I related a graphic example of the receding sea on the coast of New Jersey. The video showed how the state of New Jersey was selling coastal lands left behind by the receding sea. The prime sea frontage is being snapped up by casino and hotel developers as fast as it is deserted by the sea. My last video also showed how and why the salt marshes in Jamaica Bay, New York were disappearing. Now, in order to understand receding seas, we have to look at the bigger and broader picture. We all know the Bible story of Noah and the ark. In the book of Genesis, God instructed Noah to build an ark to save himself, his family, and all the animal species when the great flood came. Noah obeyed God, built the ark, and survived the great flood. He and his family were the only people left to repopulate the earth. The flood covered the entire world, the Bible tells us. When the flood subsided, Noah's ark came to rest on the tallest mountaintop, and that is perfectly logical. For if the earth was covered completely with water, and the waters subsided gradually, the first piece of land to appear would be obviously a mountaintop. This mountaintop has been identified as Mount Ararat in today's Turkey. It is also quite logical that Ararat was the actual mountain, as I will show. It is a long way from the shoreline of New Jersey to the top of Mount Ararat in Turkey. However, there is a direct connection between the story of Noah on Mount Ararat and receding seas in New Jersey. So let us move on. When Noah stepped out of the ark on the top of Mount Ararat, the Lord instructed him to go forth and multiply. He was accompanied by his wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their sons. As time passed, Noah died, but the family continued to multiply as the Lord had ordained. Noah's great-grandson Nimrod established the city of Nineveh on the Tigris River in what we know as Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means between the rivers being the Tigris and Euphrates. These 2 rivers rise in the highlands of what we know today as Iraq. Now follow me closely. Nineveh was the capital of ancient Assyria. Noah is hailed as the father of the Assyrian nation. Historians tell us that Nineveh is the oldest city in Assyria. What historians omit to tell us is that not only is Nineveh the oldest in Assyria, it is the oldest city in all of Mesopotamia. The reason for this is that all the other cities established on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were established one after the other in a downward progression. In other words, Nineveh was the first city established, and all the other cities were established going downward as the sea receded. Now I'm sure you will be surprised to hear this, but it is a fact. The Bible tells us all this so you can read it for yourselves. But then there's more. Abram was born in the city of Ur of the Chaldees, which is established on the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia. Abram is hailed as the father of the Jewish nation. When he was born, Ur was a busy seaport on the Persian Gulf. Today, however, Ur is 200 miles from the Gulf and 135 feet above sea level. 4 years ago, U.S. forces invaded Iraq and fought inland for a month to get to the city of Baghdad. In ancient times, Baghdad was a harbor on the Persian Gulf, but today, Baghdad is 350 miles from the Gulf and 125 feet above sea level. So if we look again at Nineveh, Nineveh is 500 miles from the sea today. In biblical times, Jonah the prophet lived in Nineveh and is also buried there. Again from the Bible, we know the story of Jonah being swallowed by a whale and living for 3 days in the belly of the whale. Well, we have to assume that Jonah did not walk 500 miles to be swallowed by a whale. The sea must have been very close to Nineveh in those ancient times. At any rate, boats are being uncovered from time to time by archaeologists far inland and far away from the Persian Gulf. Boats have been discovered as far inland as the city of Ashur in Iraq. Ashur is 200 miles from Nineveh and was perhaps the first city built after Nineveh in the downward progression. The fact that boats were found there bears testimony that seas were much higher at that time in history. At any rate, we know that the sea was higher worldwide because it once covered the North American continent. So the connection between Ararat and New Jersey is the receding seas. The sea has been receding ever since those biblical times, and it still recedes today. And it will continue to recede for a long time to come. It will definitely not rise. The Bible tells us that the two cities, Pithom and Ramses, were built by Jewish slave labor under Ramses II. The two cities were known as store cities because grain and armaments were stored there. These two cities featured in the Exodus story. History tells us that Ramses and Pithom both were on the sea. They both had harbors. Archaeologists were searching for years for these cities along the Mediterranean coast. They were looking for the harbors. Their search on the sea was unsuccessful. Through a quirk of fate, an amazing discovery was made. A farmer plowing his field away inland struck a stone. The stone had hieroglyphs. When archaeologists examined the hieroglyphs, they discovered Ramses. They finally discovered Ramses. The peculiar thing was that the city was discovered 6 miles inland and not on the coastline where they were searching previously. This discovery of the city of Ramses was made in 1883. That was 125 years ago. Yet, archaeologists still fail to understand that the seas recede and have receded over thousands of years. If only they knew this, it would solve a lot of archaeological mysteries. Having found Ramses, it was easier to find Pithom. Pithom evidently had its harbor on the Red Sea, and Ramses had its harbor on the Mediterranean. This video is made with the hope that archaeologists will use the information about receding seas in their research. It is very important that the phenomena be understood and recognized for its worth. Today, marine archaeologists are still searching in Jamaica for 2 of Columbus's ships. which were scuttled there. They would have had much more success had they been searching a quarter-mile inland. They insist on searching in the sea. Once archaeologists supply the knowledge of receding seas, they will be able to locate many lost civilizations just by knowing where the seas once were. They will solve many archaeological mysteries, including why all ancient civilizations first evolved on the tops of mountains. These videos are made with that hope, that the science will be recognized that the seas are receding, and pay attention to the wealth of knowledge it provides to research in earth sciences. Receding seas affects all aspects of our lives and has been doing so for a very long time.
In the Mysterious Receding Sea series, I'm trying to show that earthquakes occur anywhere and everywhere on Earth. When an earthquake occurs in any particular area, we are terrified. Our complacency is shattered because it gave us no warning. The nature of earthquakes is their unpredictability. If there is major damage and loss of life, the terror assumes greater proportion, as seen recently in China. In recent times, as cities grow and sprawl across the landscape, earthquake threat has become a major concern, as seen recently in the American Midwest. Several tremors have shaken cities that never thought they had anything to fear from earthquakes. The lesson here is that earthquakes occur everywhere on the face of the earth at any time, at one time or another. No one or no area is safe. On the other side of the coin, earthquakes seldom make the news on a daily basis, as they are now doing. This means that the awareness and threat of earthquakes have been heightened. This is a good thing. Steps are being taken now by municipalities to put systems in place to offset the earthquake disaster that may occur in the future. The premise is that we are all vulnerable, so let's take steps to offset an eventuality when it does occur, as it will.
The recent spate of earthquakes across the North American continent is nothing unusual, yet it has attracted a lot of media attention. Earthquakes are scary occurrences and oftentimes destructive and deadly, so they are naturally a matter of national concern. First off, we don't know a lot about earthquakes, and that adds more to our fear. Secondly, very few experts actually understand earthquakes. This alone is cause to be scared. Well, first of all, we have to recognize that earthquakes occur everywhere and anywhere on the face of the earth. They occur daily around the world, and sometimes they focus in certain areas where plates meet or river valleys occur. Sometimes they break new ground, and this is taken literally. Earthquakes erupt, leaving large fissures in the earth where none have been before. The San Andreas, the Haywood, and the Mississippi's New Madrid Falls, and several others act up from time to time and from place to place. This pattern is unpredictable. We don't know where they will strike next. We have to realize that all river valleys are earthquake faults, and they were established a long time ago. How long ago is your guess as well as mine. What we do know is that they could have been established while they were still under the seas. Yes, we still have to understand that rivers were just ordinary expansion fault lines while the sea covered the earth. Similar to the Mid-Atlantic Rift expansion fault, which is under the Atlantic. As the seas receded, it exposed these faults, which by their very nature acts as drains to the sea. We love rivers, and we extol river valleys in song and legend. River valleys are beautiful, silent, yet sinister as they carry on with their expansion. The only indication of this expansion is frequent earth tremors, which don't make the news but are recorded daily on the USGA earthquake maps.
The tremors are trying to tell us that the river is expanding. Seismic creep is taking place. Seismic creep is the insidious element of earthquake expansion that topples bridges and threatens dams. Engineers know nothing about seismic creep. They are not even aware of seismic creep because current mindset knows nothing about it. The result is that engineers keep designing bridges over rivers without factoring in creep. Engineers design bridges for finite spans. The potential for expansion of an earthquake is infinite, as proven over and over as bridges fail mysteriously. So one of the many things to fear in a major earthquake are the integrity of the bridges which we cross every day. There are 600,000 of them in the United States alone. They have all been designed with finite spans and no factor included for seismic creep. There is a growing awareness of the necessity to design bridges for earthquake. Major cities are retrofitting all their old bridges for earthquake resistance. That is a step in the right direction. The next step is to design bridges that embody an equation for seismic creep. You will notice from all the earthquake reports how many shocks are centered near or on rivers. This is because the river is an earthquake fault line and as such is expanding. The expansion is not obvious, as I stressed, but each tremor is telling us that expansion is taking place, and that is called the seismic creep. This expansion translates into worldwide expansion because earthquakes are leaving large fissures in the earth every day. These earthquakes seldom make the news unless there is a mass destruction or fatalities. Such an example is the recent earthquake in China with a massive death toll. Oftentimes, they are in remote regions away from urban areas, so that the only record of their occurrence is on the USGA database records. We have to remember that earthquakes have been taking place for millions of years before modern recording methods. So that alone should tell us that a whole lot of expansion has taken place before modern times. Going on into the future. After the New Madrid earthquake in 1812, several large fissures were reported all over the United States. One such fault line opened up the side of a mountain in Lampo, California, half a continent away from the Mississippi. The fault line is still expanding. I first saw the fault line 30 years ago. When I returned recently, the entire area was covered with houses. The houses sitting astride the fault line are all experiencing structural problems, and some are now condemned. The developers did not know the history of the area. In fact, they did not know that the fault had destroyed the monastery in its path in 1811. They did not see 30 years ago what I saw. At that time, the ruins of the old monastery were still to be seen there. It could also be clearly seen where the rift ran right through the old monastery and destroyed it. When I returned 30 years later, they had cleared away the ruins of the monastery and built homes. They had placed a historical plaque to tell what had happened to the monastery back in 1812. So the developers did not know a lot of things. They did not know that the rift down the hillside occurred in the earthquake in 1812. They also did not know that it was an earthquake fault. They certainly did not know that the fissure was expanding. They knew nothing about seismic creep, which is not surprising. Very few people do. An earthquake is a release of surface tension. Because the earth is expanding, the surface is constantly in tension, and it fractures and quakes as tension is released. That force is what generates the earthquake. That is why they are so unpredictable. The expansion is taking place globally. We may have earthquakes in North America today, but at the same time there are earthquakes in Japan and the Mid-Atlantic and Tuvalu in the South Pacific. I mentioned that state of Tuvalu, for those islands are supposed to be swamped by rising seas. The fact is that Tuvalu sits on the cusp of two active plates in the Pacific. The seafloor maps show quite clearly where the island chain is located. The islands are actually sinking into the ocean as geological conditions on the Pacific seafloor dictate. Tuvalu has been featured worldwide as a prima facie case in the global warming debate. Tuvalu is used as an example to show the world that sea levels are rising. The truth is that several islands in the Pacific are sinking. The Carteret Islands and the Duke of York Islands are all being swamped like Tuvalu. These unfortunate islands are seldom mentioned in connection with global warming. They all sit on shifting plates on the Pacific Ocean floor. The tsunami that struck in Southeast Asia on Boxing Day 2004 was caused by an earthquake that took place off the island of Sumatra. The earthquake caused a slump in the ocean floor which triggered the tsunami. The most important development resulting from that tragic event has been overlooked by scientists. It has been reported that the sea has receded from its former shoreline. That is to say, that after the tsunami, the sea has settled down again, but it has not returned to its former level on the beach. Some years ago, after a major earthquake in Nicaragua, it was reported that the sea level offshore had dropped 20 feet. After the great earthquake in Lisbon on November 1st, 1775, it was reported that the land rose, leaving boats exposed on the seafloor. Early Sunday morning on September 18, 1994, two large earthquakes rocked Rabaul, increasing in intensity throughout the day. By late evening, parts of the shoreline began to rise. The coral reef off Rabaul surfaced and people feasted on trapped fish and other marine life. Darwin would have called that condition a raised beach. In all these cases, it was reported that the land raised. The illusion here is not that the land rose. What really occurred was that the sea level receded. Darwin studied raised beaches all around the Pacific and on the South American mainland. It had never occurred to him that the opposite could be true. The sea was
Old Harbor, Jamaica. The name Old Harbor tells us a story. Hundreds of years ago, during the Spanish occupation, Old Harbor was the main port of Jamaica. Ships of every European nation passed through here on their way to and from the Spanish Main. The ships and their crews were searching for gold and a passage to the east. An active reciprocal trade was also taking place at that time. Ships returned to Spain loaded with cargoes of lard and hides. Jamaica's first export was lard and hides, not the famous rum for which it is known today. In 1494, when Columbus landed at Seville on the north coast of Jamaica, he released a few head of cattle and some pigs on the island. By the time the Spaniards returned in 1503, they had multiplied into millions of heads. They roamed the island freely, living off the lush grasslands. Lard was obtained from boiling the pigs, and cows were slaughtered indiscriminately for their hides. Old Harbor is still busy today, but the traffic is in cars, trucks, and carts. The little town is constantly jam-packed from one end to the other, creating a bottleneck in the main road that passes through the town on the way from Kingston, the capital city. Hundreds of years ago, ships stopped coming to Old Harbor. The reason is that over that same time, the sea has receded steadily, deserting the Old Harbor forever. The sea is no longer here. As you can see, the traffic here today is of a different nature. All sorts of trading takes place now in this teeming town center, far away from the sea. No one would ever believe that the sea once covered this area where I now stand. Today, Old Harbor is a market and trading town on Jamaica's south coast, the sea miles away. You can see immediately that it is a busy inland metropolis remotely related to the sea that once made it a harbor. Over 500 years, the harbor has disappeared. The sea has receded a distance of 2 miles from where I now stand. The sea's recession was not noticeable over that period for several reasons. First of all, it did not take place all at once. The progress was slow and timely, but relentlessly progressive. Over the successive hundreds of years, the slow recession of the sea sealed the fate of Old Harbor as a harbor anyhow forever. Today we are going to follow the progress of the sea's recession. I'm going to show you the path of progression by driving from here down to the sea. I'm going to show you where the sea is today in relation to where I now stand. I will take you along on a visit to the new coastline to show how much the sea has receded. As you can see, we are now in open country, and the land is graded gently, almost level, as it slopes towards the coast. If this land was not covered with shrubbery, trees, and houses, you would be able to see the gentle slope of the land. In the American Southwest and in Mexico, such a slope is referred to as a bajada. It is a gentle slope which was formerly the continental shelf under the ancient seas that cover the earth. The entire earth was once covered with the seas, so this recession of the sea is not peculiar to Old Harbor in Jamaica. It occurs all around the world, as I've shown in my other videos. All these dwellings and all this development has been erected over centuries as the sea receded further and further with each passing year. So as we are driving down to the sea coast today, we are driving over lands that were once under the sea. You can see the vast expanses of land and all the buildings that have been built up successively over the years since the Spaniards arrived in Jamaica. All this land we can see, looking in all directions, was once under the sea. We are now arriving at the seaside, which as you can see is still receding. We can see even now that houses are being built further and further out onto the flats. The land is taken over or captured by the residents as fast as the sea recedes. After residents have lived here for years, they forget where the shoreline was. Others coming after will have no knowledge of the shifting shoreline for a number of reasons. First of all, there are no sustained observations being made of the phenomenon. This is due to the lack of awareness that the anomaly even exists. Generally, residents are not aware that the sea recedes. Those residents who build houses on the mudflats today are aware that the sea has left this land behind. Those who come years after, however, will not be able to detect the phenomena because development will have erased the evidence. For example, 30 years ago, I visited this area and saw at first hand houses being built on stilts over the mudflats left behind by the receding sea. Today, these houses appear to be well established. No one would suspect that only a few short years ago, the sea was right here where I now stand. We spend very little time observing the sea and her movements. The reason for this is because we ourselves have very little time to do just that. Secondly, and most importantly, is the outward and inward movement of the tides on a daily basis. This subtle movement of tides conceals or clouds detection of the sea's recession. One is never quite sure where the sea is at any one time of the day or night. That is mainly how the mystery of the receding seas is perpetuated. In 100 years, this coastline will be perhaps another quarter mile away. The residents will, however, know nothing of the change because of these deceptive subtleties of the sea. On the other hand, a new generation will by that time be living here where we stand today. Each new generation comes along and sees the sea. They accept it as they see it where it is. The gradual recession is not noticed over a generation. The next generation comes along and the process is repeated. The ongoing concept is that the sea is unchanging, that it is constant, that is in the same place at the same level. But in reality, it is not. It has receded. We are all constantly being deluded year after year, time after time, century after century, by the mysterious receding seas. Receding seas